Hey everybody, I've mentioned it once or twice before in previous videos, but a lot of you might not know that I've been doing like a post-session D&D debrief every week for one of the games that I run. And I actually sit down with one of the players from that table, the illustrious Pittsburgh Pat, who is also a dungeon master. He runs not only an Adventures League game most weeks, but also an after-school D&D program as well. A lot of D&D talk online can get a bit like hypothetical and abstract, but I think a lot of folks out there will get more from these like grounded and concrete talks based on real life examples of play. Now, to be fair, we are also two nerdy friends having a conversation, so there are inevitable tangents into books and shows and movies, but 9 times out of 10, we extract Dungeon Master lessons and advice from these side quests as well. This is the latest episode of that series where we talk about making things spooky, keeping traps fun and interesting, experimenting with like different techniques at the table, and just basically what worked and what didn't. If you dig this one, there's a whole playlist of these over on Pat's channel, link down below. Hope you enjoy it.
Hello, it's Pittsburgh Pat here with Ryan Doyle of the Verdigris Table. How are you, Ryan?
Good morning. How you feeling, Pat?
Everything's pretty good. We had a great D&D session last night, which we're going to tell you all about. That's what we do on Wednesday mornings, and I post usually later in the day. And Ryan's going to post this one tomorrow, I think, on his channel as well. So you can catch it there. So check out both of our D&D channels. We have a lot of good content there. I basically focus on like newer players and we talk about like tips for new DMs and also for new players. And we got a whole bunch of new rules in the new 2014 uh, Player's Handbook, and we got the DMG coming out pretty soon here too.
Which I'm
And
excited for. I'm looking forward to
yeah,
getting the DMG in my hands because we
and
just hit level 5 too. I want those Bastion rolls.
yeah, that's right. So Bastion's kicking at level 5, so that's gonna be fun. And Bastions are hideouts or like lairs or your house, your apartment, like your, you know, Hall of Justice, if you're superheroes, whatever, headquarters, the Laura Croft Mansion. Uh, I started watching that, the new Laura Croft Tomb Raider animated.
Hmm.
Haven't quite caught on yet, but it was okay so far. And Ryan's got a book right over his shoulder there that he just published, and it's doing well. And the link's in the video here. So check that out. That's like a great way to, I was using it last night to do some resourcing, figure out some motivations for my character, things that my character might want to do next, things that he might want to acquire, and also possibly allies, organizations that he may have had. It's great for backstories. It's great for character ideas, that sort of thing.
And it's physical now. There's print copies. They've been arriving all over well, at least all over the country. It does ship international, but I haven't gotten anybody out of the States yet get one, but a whole wave arrived this week. It's been cool to get pictures from all over the place. People pumped to actually have the physical thing in their hands. But yeah, character backstories, whether session 0 or down the road, you want to flesh a character out. It's also got a lot for the Dungeon Master side of things, factions and monsters and magic items and plot hooks, locations, NPCs, all sorts of cool stuff. So yeah.
And you can get it immediately as a PDF. And we
Mhm.
actually, did a bunch of videos where you have D&D YouTube creators get on board and create characters. So there's a whole playlist of those videos. Those are a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and there's some more on the way. It's a cool excuse to sit down with awesome creative people. You've been on there.
Mhm.
We had a lot of fun,
Mhm.
and yeah, I mean it's basically a mini game in and of itself. It's very
Mhm.
cool to see how creative minds work together with a little prompting. I always really enjoy the process, and I mean, everyone tells me they enjoy it. They're on
Well,
my show, but
character creation is a big deal in D&D. That's
mm,
that's something that people really, and it's as it's outlined in the player's handbook. I think the 2024 version of the book is easier than the 2014 version, but I'm not going to say it's easy because I made a video, and it's like 27 minutes long, and it's not it's the basic, like the first 6, 7 steps in making a character using the new book. But you know, I got a lot it took me through step by step, but I'm trying to streamline the process because like I teach younger kids
Hmm.
and new players, and so I'm gonna yeah, I've been documenting that. So I'm gonna have something soon with kind of like a streamlined fun process. But what your stuff does too is that you give um you can sink in as deep as you want, with Ryan's stuff. So check that out. It's pretty cool. So it's Halloween week. Pretty much Halloween's coming up. And so this is sort of this is Halloween related, I guess. It's not really, I don't know if it's D&D related, but I have a question for you. So
True.
if there were a house for sale and it had a reputation, or there was a rumor that it was haunted,
Hmm.
would that prevent you from buying the
Maybe. Maybe. I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious. Um,
house? That's
I,
awesome.
I think that's a Michael Scott line. But
Oh, okay.
the I feel vibes. I've definitely walked in, like, even, house hunting for this house. Like, we walked into a place and it's like, this place feels bad. This place has got weird energy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if I believe in like ghosts as far as conscious entities, some afterlife contingent thing, whatever, but like I do believe in echoes and like stains, right? Like if I drop this coffee on the rug, it's gonna leave an impression. And like maybe eventually you could clean it out, but it's always going to be a little discolored, a little sticky. There's always going to be something a little off about it. So yeah, I don't think I would buy a haunted house
Right.
if I felt it were so.
Well, see,
Do you?
there's just the suggestion of it, I think, would throw me off. So there's a house that I pass, it's really close to it's not like a neighbor, but it's a few it's in the neighborhood. And I pass it. And when I was looking for this house, my friend who's a real estate agent, we were looking at all kinds of stuff in this area, and she said, "Oh, not that one." And I
Hmm.
said, "Why?" She said, "It's haunted." And I said, "Oh." And then I asked her about it later, and she doesn't seem to remember saying that. But the fact that it's in my mind, so that house is for sale now, and that's the reason I say that, because over the years I've watched the for sale signs go up in that house's front lawn several times, and I don't know how many times, but because of that suggestion so many years ago, it seems like it's more often than it seems to me, it appears that it's more often than maybe other houses. That may or may not be the case. That may just be because that idea has been planted in my head. But, I'm thinking to myself, if I had bought that house, would I have manufactured, like, every time you hear a noise, like I hear, noises I have a whole old house. So like this thing settles, like, and if there's a windstorm, you can hear it creak. And but I don't attribute that to anything. If I lived in that house, would I attribute that to something supernatural? It's just kind of funny, I thought.
Yeah, it's very easy to like, oh, it's confirmation bias. Oh, it's the placebo effect. Oh, it's
Right.
just in your head. Yeah, and so is everything else, right? Like that doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means we don't quite understand the mechanism of it, and we have a label that we can stop thinking about it. But like, it doesn't matter if your house is haunted or not, really, if you're convinced that it is,
Right.
that is sufficient to, I don't know, affect your mood and your appetite and your sleep patterns, I'm sure, right? Like it would still make an impact, whether or not ghosts are real, right? Or there's some sort of weird, uh, I don't know,
Physical
electromagnetic
effects. Yeah.
disturbance that makes you feel off because of the way that wind hits the hillside and it creates tones that you can't quite hear, but you feel, or there's like
Power
whatever,
lines nearby.
power lines or like
Yeah. I
power lines
mean,
underneath or water underneath or like freaking, we're
sure.
in Pittsburgh. Maybe there's a mine 300, 400, 500 feet below you. And it's like, it's not ghosts, it's carbon monoxide. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
cool. I still don't want to
Yeah.
live here.
Radon or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. There isn't, I mean, we're running right now in D&D, you're running Ghosts of Saltmarsh, so
Mm,
ghosts in the title. So like that made me think, but there's a story I'd like to tell about this house. I bought a used pool table from a pool table place a long time ago. You know, very reputable seller, but it was obviously not brand new because I can't afford that. So I bought the used one, and so and I was really intent on learning how to shoot pool. Anyway, it was they set it up in the basement. I put a cover on it, and the cover was like is like just a thin plastic sheet with like maybe half dollar size like weights on the corners, right? So uh, I we bought it in the summertime. Around fall, I went down to do laundry one day and I was like, this is odd. The cover was on the floor. And I was like, you know I put the cover back on. I always put the cover back on. So I put the cover back on. I go upstairs and then I come back down to do laundry again to like switch the clothes to the dryer. And it's on the floor again, the cover. And it's and I'm thinking, so the story behind the pool table that I bought, these guys told me at the store. I said, yeah, it was, we got that one real cheap. It came from a funeral home. And I was like, oh, and I didn't think anything about it. And then once I saw the cover on the floor twice, I was thinking, funeral home? Did they lay out bodies on this thing? Like what, like what did they multitask this thing? Like what's going on here? And just then the furnace kicked on.
Oh, sure.
And there was a vent and it caught and I could see where the air got caught under it and you
Mm.
could and then it would eventually set up like this wavy rhythm effect and it would float off on the ground. But just for a moment, I considered the possibility that I had a haunted pool table, you know? So, that's that level of suggestion, is interesting. That can be translated into DMing as well, right? So we talk about like how a little bit of suggestion lets the player's imaginations kind of like run wild.
Mm.
So,
Hmm.
so it's similar to like your book with the fleshing out of the backgrounds of characters. You can say like, a sentence that's like, I don't know what's good one I used last night was something about a criminal background. They want to pull off the perfect job. It doesn't say anything about the job. That's left up to the player to elaborate on. So is it a casino job? Is it a bank job? Is it a find and replace? Is it a rescue from kidnapping? I mean, what's the job? So I just think it's amazing how much of what we do with Dungeons and Dragons is really the igniting of people's imaginations and letting them tell the story in their head.
And writing the compendium really helped me focus in on that of like, what is the right level of detail? How can I like plant a seed that's like the smallest unit of information, inspiration that will expand into like the person on the receiving end's mind so that you will run with this, you will build connections around it. um and that has deeply affected my dungeon master style in the last year or so. Drew me towards Dolmenwood. Dolmenwood is a great example of that,
Yeah.
of just like the like three descriptive words. They're almost always adjectives, but like three or four good words is better than three or four paragraphs by a long shot. Same thing with rune descriptions, same thing with character descriptions, NPCs, whatever.
Sure.
So I've been essentially doing less for a long time now, and it works. And now, especially last night, I'm getting better and better at being comfortable doing less because it feels like as the dungeon master, it's your job to fill the space, drive the
Right.
action, set the pace. Um, and from the other side, I want more player agency and control and involvement. And I do let my players set the tone to a large degree. Hey, here's here's all of the kinds of D&D. Do you gravitate more towards combat or social, or like, all right, you're in town. Do we want to RP out a whole day's worth of shopping, or do we just want to like handle the bookkeeping between sessions and move on? Um, but the more I can surrender and like back off, the more the players eventually start to fill in that space. I think we saw a good amount of that last night.
Yeah, well, you
Um,
had a different style of play last night. We had almost like not quite, but almost like a wargaming kind of setup. We
mm,
we storm this beach, we land on this beach, and we find remnants of a battle there, and we find like some bleached bones, which suggests that they may be the corpses of like raised undead skeletons. And as we're walking on the beach, we kind of like every hex on the map has a chance of or maybe it already has been determined um, whether or not like a party of skeletons are going to pop up at us. So we triggered one. We got 5 skeletons that like came at us, and so you know that was fun trying to navigate the safe path, right? Using survival checks, using what else did we use?
well, detect
Uh,
detect magic was huge.
well, that was the solution, right? So
Yeah. So it's set up as written. It's kind of like, all right, depending on how good the check is, that's how many squares you get before you trigger a combat encounter. And that's
okay.
fun once, right? And there's escalation. But you're level 5. I throw 20 skeletons at you. It's still not really much of a challenge, right? It's a logistical challenge to run, and it's an hour of our lives, but it's not that scary. The scary part is navigating this sandy dune windswept expanse to get to the other side safely.
Right.
So I kind of opened it up. It's skill challengey, just like, all right, you tell me what you're going to do to establish a safe path through here. Someone else has gone through here. Apparently back and forth. There was like a pirate raid that burnt this abbey to the ground. Those guys made it through. You can follow their path if you can find it. Um, and then yeah, detect magic kind of felt like uh a cheat code. I let you roll a D10. Like, okay, one, it takes you a minute to figure out are there skeletons, and technically maybe you don't detect undead lying in wait for you with a detect magic, but like, maybe you do. I don't know. There's clearly some sort of like trap element to it all. So
Well,
I
the
rolled
fact that it
it.
was on the beach like made it feel like it was a mine, like you said, minesweeper. I was thinking
Yes,
of the old guy on the beach with the metal detector,
yes.
finding coins and stuff. So yeah, it had a really that was a nice cinematic feel to using detect magic to get through the dunes. So yeah, so I mean you can, that's the cool thing. You can do different kinds of gameplay like that. Um the skeletons I have here. Oh, they were hodgepodge of different bones, right? So that's how we knew like it was there was some kind of weird necromancy going on here, right?
Yeah, you guys got very curious about you tried all of the things to gain as much information as possible, which is good. Um, and to a point, it put me on the back foot because there were some like good rolls too. We're talking like over 20 investigation checks and arcana checks and skill checks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I figured what's an interesting way to convey that there's a ton of skeletons? Like, how would you know that? Like, how would you learn that from like one batch of skeletons that there's probably a bunch? So I was like, yeah, these are like someone had a giant pile of bones, right? These are mismatched Legos, which means they had a ton of Legos. So
Right.
odds are, yeah, there's more than these five that you found so far.
Yeah, the as we were playing, I was thinking of that island. Last session you mentioned, or maybe it was the one before, we were talking about the it's on Netflix, Blue Eye Samurai, I think.
Oh, yes. So good.
Yeah, so I just finished that, and I was watching it the other day, and episode 6 is where the protagonist goes into to this like fortress island, goes through like a tunnel.
Straight up a dungeon crawl. That whole
Totally
episode
D&D.
is 100% a D&D dungeon. Um,
Yep.
Perfectly scripted. I mean, it's if you haven't seen Blue Eye Samurai, it is beautiful. It's the kind of show you could mute it and put on music, and it would be an incredible experience.
Well,
Um,
actually, yeah, the one episode they do, I think episode 7, they actually do like a kabuki theater kind of like thing, and it goes back and
yes,
forth between, and there's this wonderful music and those little blocks to like
yes,
ting 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 ting.
yes.
Um, yeah, and it's very well done dramatically. Good pacing. But the D&D episode is what I'm calling it. The dungeon, the breaking into I'm gonna use some of that tomorrow when actually today, maybe after school, I want to do the pit trap, and and then I want to do the spiked pit trap thing where it's like, how do you get across this thing?
Mm.
And I don't know, I guess I'll say spoilers for anybody who's gonna watch Blue Eye Samurai, so skip ahead like five minutes. But yeah, so you try to jump across the pit trap and you make it, but then there's another one and
Hmm.
you jump across that one, but there's two. So like as you're in midair, like the second one opens up and it's like, so now what do you do? So I hope you have feather fall, or or like stab the wall and like save yourself that way. Um yeah, that's pretty cool. And then what's wrong with just like climbing down into the pit and walking across and then climbing back up, which is fine, except like in the Tomb of Horrors, or actually in the Tomb of Annihilation book I'm going to run today. I'm going to adapt that so that there's pressure plates at the end, the far wall, where you have to detect those. If you detect those, then you can set them up maybe. But otherwise, spikes come shooting out of the ground. So yeah, it's traps within traps. And the underwater pick locking,
Mm.
that was
Mm.
fantastic. Like, let's
Mm.
add some dramatic tension to this. So you got the water trap, but then you're picking a lock, and so now the DC keeps going up, and that could be a fun way to get your players, especially especially now, because my rogue is level 5. I've got a +10 to sleight of hand.
Mm.
um, so right off the bat, I've got an 11 at least. And, so a normal lock picking thing is probably, is likely to work for me. So making it more difficult, how do you do that environmentally, right? So now you're underwater holding your breath, now you got to do it. So it's maybe could be a constitution throw, could be, you know, all kinds of different stuff.
I used to have a hard time with traps, like making traps interesting. I think in the old days, maybe it was no, even then, really, even old school style. But like, it feels on paper a lot of the time in pre-written adventures just like a resource tax. Like, all right, we're gonna soften them up before the fight.
Right.
We're gonna like ding them for some HP. Um, but that's boring. The realization I had of treating traps like puzzles, like traps are
Yes.
puzzles,
Yep.
opened up the whole like I mean that's basically I ran that session like a puzzle, not a series of traps because like
Mm.
find your way through the maze through trial and error. is boring pretty quickly, right? Like I'll do that. That's how we started, but that's not how we finished because a couple hours of that is like, I don't know, pin the tail on the donkey. I don't know. It's a different game. But
Yeah.
the idea of like, okay, the point is not how many hit points are we going to lose in this. It's how are the interesting question is how do you solve it?
Yes.
And I don't come up with that answer out of the, I mean, like, I can't help but come up with some answers, but there's not a single solution. There's not like, oh, you got to do this to get through. Leaving room for the players to get creative and surprise you makes it way more interesting for everybody. Like I didn't know how you guys were going to get through it. There's a voice in the back of my head last night being like, I hope this isn't boring. Or like I don't quite know how this is going to go, which produces like some level
Yeah.
of anxiety when you're feel responsible for entertaining everybody for 3 hours.
Well, the
But I
thing
kind of
was,
surrendered to that and let you guys figure out how to deal with the situation, and you did, and it was interesting, and it created a much more interesting situation at the end of the night, which we got to deal with.
what do you mean by that? Oh,
Uh,
yeah. Oh,
well,
that's
you
right.
left a ton. You managed to get through the skeletons.
Yeah.
You got through the skull dunes pretty much unscathed. You fought five skeletons out of like hundreds, probably.
Oh,
Like
I see what you're saying.
you guys made your way through pretty well. You got to the other side and we're like, oh, we should have left like breadcrumbs or something. We did not mark our trail in any way. I was like, yes, I
You
thought that.
noted that.
Um, and you guys, so you got to the Abbey. There are survivors from the raid. You have a paladin with a high religion and a he's not no, he is redemption. Because he used to be part of like some evil cult. So like for backstory reasons, I gave him advantage on the checks, but he pretty quickly figured out like these dudes are evil.
Yeah.
They worship the shadow that fell. It's the shadow that falls, which is one of many names for this thing. So he figures out that they're evil. There's a lot of he gets lied to a lot and learns that he's been lied to a lot. I gave him a couple insight checks for free,
Yeah.
not for free, but like I called for some insight checks on his behalf. This guy was lying to him left and right, the like priest with like the emblem of his station on his chest. Um, and yeah, we initially you deceived some of like the biggest guard essentially. You had like run off into the sunset chasing after pirates that weren't there. And then you got to the boss guy and convinced him to like come with you. But you were deceived and he raised the army
All the
of
rest of the
skeletons.
skeletons.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is there was a link between the number of skeletons we fought or didn't fight and how big that final boss was, because it was the summation of all the skeletons that were left.
Pretty much. There
Okay.
was escalating, like if you kept triggering skeletons, eventually you would have triggered the whole of it. Um,
Got it.
but instead he triggered the whole of it while he was there, and the gladiator, who I think you guys underestimated because it was literal waves of bones coming at you and some like juggernaut thing slowly making its way.
It
And
was
like this
like
one human dude can't be that much of a threat, but he's got
right.
three attacks and like 140 hit points or something. He's
Yeah, and he has this shield bash, so he knocks you down
yes.
prone, and then all of a sudden, like he's got advantage on his attacks with his, melee weapon. So that's brutal.
People sleep on shove, and shove is better now. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, if I can knock you prone, now I have advantage. Now I'm much more likely to hit, let alone crit.
Well,
It's
that's one
bad.
of the reasons I took you've been letting us change our characters between
Mm.
sessions in order to modify our characters in between sessions in order to explore the new rules. And so I went from being like more of an assassin rogue into a arcane trickster rogue. And that's one of the reasons that I took Tasha's hideous laughter. If you can knock somebody prone, right, from a distance by telling them a joke, and plus I love the idea of like telling
It's
jokes.
good.
So yeah, especially really bad ones. And then they failed that wisdom save. Now they're prone. Now the paladin can run in there, do his dirty work. Um, you know, it's so much more fun. We have a monk that likes to melee fight, so he gets in there, he gets to do his flurry of blows. Uh, yeah, it's a good mechanic to be able to do, especially from a distance. Um, but yeah, the shield bash that with that gladiator, that was really rough. And we found out his motivation. You told us his motivation was that he wished he had died in glorious combat, and so now he's fighting, to the death, basically. So
Yeah, he's got a big bandage on his head. He's kind of like embarrassed to have survived that last fight that
yeah,
they clearly lost.
when we
Um,
healed him.
you did heal him.
So we had this whole idea that it was going to be a diplomatic solution. We went into the headquarters. We met with the de facto boss, and we said, "Okay, Saltmarsh wants you out of here." And he said, "Well, I'll go back and talk to your, superiors, and we'll negotiate something." And then he betrayed us on the way back. And you know, in retrospect, we should have known that was coming, but we did. We're not cold-blooded killers. We didn't just walk in there and slaughter everybody right off the bat. I had like this amazing lockpick roll, so we
Hmm.
surreptitiously opened the door, got to see what was inside. There's three guards like hanging out there playing cards, and then Bertram's yells, "Hey, there's pirates out here!" And they run past me and smash me, and smash the door into me like Wile E. Coyote up against the
Hmm.
wall. And yeah, that was an instance where two party members were not on the same page
Oh,
as to what the plan was.
chaos. I
Yeah,
mean, chaos
yeah,
ensued on the NPC/enemy side and intra party.
yep,
It's like I do this, and it's like, wait, can I go? Do I want to do that? It's like it happened. You
you
did
did it.
that. We're running with it. Um,
Yeah, and the thing is, it's fun. There's different motivations going on both sides in both parties. So we had different, we thought originally we were going to stealth in, and then that turns out not to be the case. And then the paladin comes in and lays down like this beautiful what's the ability that he had?
his channel divinity,
Something
it's
about peace,
aura. I think it's aura. Yeah, aura of peace or the
aura
peacemaker
of
or something
peace.
like that. But
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
got. I mean, it does a couple things, but he has essentially a persuasion boost. And he's already got it.
Gotcha. +5 for persuasion.
And he's got
Okay.
a crazy charisma score because he's a paladin, and he's got persuasion. Um, so yeah, I say this a lot, but I think I tend to allow more meta than most, or at least some dungeon
Mm,
masters. I'm comfortable
mm.
with that because I am analytically minded, especially when it's a new system or whatever. I like to like dig into like whatever the tinkery side of things, the rule system side of
Yeah.
things.
How
Is
does
this
it work?
serving the game or not? Like I have those above table conversations more readily than a lot of dungeon masters. But that doesn't mean that I won't lean on the gas sometimes, if not often, to kind of simulate the fact that like, yeah, this is happening in a 6 second increment. You guys don't have 20 minutes to confer. So like that little bit of chaos happens. It would it makes sense that it's happening. It's actually serving the story. It's more realistic that this guy bursts in and decides to do something and on a whim does it and like now it's happening. It's like, well, okay, can we like talk about this? It's like you can to a degree, but like it's happened. This is what they're doing in response to that. The world is in motion. You are responding to it in real time. Um
And at one point, you had to kind of lay down the law of like, okay, three of the party members are out here with this dissident member of the cultists, right? Who doesn't like the leader. And then the other two are in with the leader. So you can hear this, you can't hear this. So, we're all at the same table and we could hear each other last night. We didn't have the ambient noise wasn't terrible at the gaming store. So, but you know, your players, your characters can't hear it. So act as if they can't hear that yet. They don't have
and
that knowledge.
I think it's a privilege to have a good player base that I get to allow that much meta and then also believe in my players drawing that line between like, okay, you know this, but your character does not act accordingly.
Right.
Maybe when we're running for 11-year-olds who are just learning the game, we don't have that luxury as much.
Right.
to enforce that line of like the bleed or whatever. But the benefit of having like experienced players who are committed to the verisimilitude, the truthiness of the game itself is that like, yeah, cool, you guys can talk about this to a degree, but your characters are upstairs having one conversation, you two are downstairs having another conversation. You don't know what's happening between the two.
Right.
Therefore, whatever.
Well, on a
The
high
consequences that are
level,
there.
on a higher level, it's almost like you know, a director and an actor, right? So
Right.
so maybe you need to know this. Maybe your character needs to know, maybe the actor needs to know this in order to know how to play the character, right? Correctly.
Yes.
That's really hyper meta. The you know, maybe they don't, right? So maybe you keep them in the dark. So, did David Prowse have to know, who Luke Skywalker's father was, in order to play what he did inside the mask? Well, the actor after the fact said that he needed to, but on screen it didn't matter, right? So
Hmm.
like, he was told something else. He was told that, you know, Obi-Wan killed his father or something like that. So, when the line got delivered, it was still a secret. And that was for even bigger meta reasons, right? So that like the secret didn't get out before the movie was released. But it's something that I do bring up to the kids because I think it's important. What I try to do with the kids, especially middle schoolers, the grade schoolers really don't have too much of a problem with it, but sometimes the middle schoolers
Isn't
do. It's
isn't
like,
that isn't that interesting?
yeah, right. It's
Isn't
like
that interesting?
this is pretend, this is real, right? So you're playing this, your character knows that, but you don't know that,
It's like
right?
we forgot it. It's not like we're learning this new skill. It's like, oh yeah, you knew how to do this when you were 5 years old.
Yes. Remember how to play. Yep. That's what it is. Technical thing. Find familiar
Mm.
is not instantaneous.
No, there was so and I'm not convinced we lost D&D Beyond last night for an hour or two, which complicated some of our gameplay as well. But
Yeah, there
the
was a Wi-Fi issue in the store or something. I'm
there
not
was
sure.
no, well, I think it was D&D Beyond because we were he pulled up
Oh,
we
it
pulled up
was
some
D&D
other
Beyond.
we
That's
were
right.
getting other sites.
Yeah.
Um and we are
Glad I
dealing
printed out
we
my
so
character.
the great thing about buying it from the friendly local game shop beyond supporting the friendly local game shop is we got these sweet collector edition covers. I really love this PHB, but
Yeah, it's nice cover.
some stuff in it might not be so accurate. So there's a question of what's on the screen versus what's on the in the book doesn't necessarily match. So Find Familiar takes an hour to cast. You can cast it as a ritual, which means it takes 110 minutes, or no, which means it takes 70 minutes. It takes an hour and 10 minutes. Um, which in most 5e situations, there's no difference between 60 minutes and 70 minutes. You can bamf it in and out of existence once you have summoned the familiar as an instant.
Wait, in and out
Yeah, you can make it disappear.
huh,
If you've summoned it, you can
and reappear.
I don't know the language now.
Okay.
I'm very hesitant to like say stuff without having it in front of me these days. But I don't know if it's a pocket dimension or whatever, but it bamfs in and out of existence. You can summon it back to you. You can like send it home. But you don't have to cast the spell again to bring it back. Once it's around until it dies. And you're
I
talking about
see.
something that has one hit point. So, if it's in an AoE effect or something, it can very easily die.
That's
And
pretty
then it
cool.
takes time to and money. I believe it's 15 gold pieces, or it used to be 15 gold pieces of whatever, like incense
Burning
and
incense
charcoal.
worth of 10 plus gold pieces. Yeah.
10, okay.
Mhm. Well, it says 10 plus, so I don't know if that means depending on what you I don't know what that
10
means.
plus. Oh, huh.
Yeah, it does. It says 10 plus gold pieces. Huh.
I don't I don't know how to interpret that.
The first thing I thought of is different familiar forms may cost more. I don't know.
Can we upcast Find Familiar now? That's kind of exciting.
One familiar only. Yeah, I don't know. Uh, yeah, but the other thing about find familiar that's interesting is that in order to tell it to do something, right, that's a bonus action.
That's
So
that's how like things like that work. That's how companions work.
yeah. So there were times when Mike the druid summoned his owl, but the owl didn't do anything in combat because Mike wanted to use his bonus actions for other things. So that's also something to think about, you know?
Yeah, and there's this classic loop of like, especially with an owl has flyby, so it has fly of like 50 feet, 60 feet, and it doesn't draw attacks of opportunity when it leaves melee. So you can have the owl swoop in and take the help action. So like it can't attack, but it can like
You can
it's
distract
harrying in
or
my mind, yeah.
yeah, or it's
Which
just
gives you
harassing.
advantage, which I mean
Hmm.
for a rogue is pretty dope. It gives
Hmm.
you advantage, which triggers your sneak attack. And then that thing can fly away before this guy can swat it out of the sky. But
Yeah,
you
it's a
can't do that.
really
You can't do that for free, or else basically you're getting two characters for the price
that's
of
a
one.
that's a really good point. So like, rogues, you you have steady aim. So if
Mm,
so if you're shooting a ranged weapon, and I was using that last night, that gives you advantage. If there's a player within 5 feet in melee combat with your adversary, that gives you advantage. And now with Find Familiar, right?
well,
So
that gives you sneak attack.
it gives you sneak attack. That does not
Yeah.
give you advantage. Oh, that's right. No,
If you
you
have
get
if you it
yeah,
gets confusing because if you have
yeah,
advantage,
yeah.
then you get to use sneak
Then you get
attack.
sneak attack.
If someone's in melee, you also get sneak attack.
Right,
But
right,
yeah,
right,
I mean
right.
you use steady aim a lot. That's a new 2024 edition. That's good.
Yeah, I
If you
mean,
and it makes sense. Like there was some cost to it. Like if you don't move, right? It's instead of running 30 feet, you take a deep breath and line up your shot. Like it makes sense to me narratively as well. But yeah, it's mechanically it's good.
yeah, it is because you get that double chance to get a crit. So now you're 1 in 10 chance to get a crit. And that's really huge.
Yeah.
So that happened a couple times. That happened once for me last night. But yeah, you end up turning the rogue into a ranged fighter at some points, and he's still effective. He's dealing heavy damage, and he needed it too because once he came in contact with the gladiator, got knocked down on the ground and came within 1 hit point of losing his life. So, and actually, we had an NPC who's down, and we're still rolling death saves for the NPC. This
Mm.
brings up an interesting question. So, do you level up NPCs?
I it's weird. So in fifth edition, and we'll see with this new DMG, but the way I understand it, there's still not there's not retainers in this edition. So in old school essentials, absolutely, because those were like essentially their player characters in waiting because someone's going to die, right? So if I thought
Oh, yeah.
that's pretty much what it is. So
Yeah.
they get it, and when you're not doing milestone, you're doing XP or gold for XP, however you're doing it, they are taking experience away from the main characters. They get a
Right.
share. Usually they'll get the half share or a third share. You can negotiate in old school essentials, other systems it operates differently. Um, but here in this, I thought about it because he's been with you guys for a long time.
Mhm.
Um, but I do it's a little more maybe gamey than narrative, but I do like the idea of you like outgrowing his
Hmm.
usefulness.
I agree.
Because
Yeah, we
otherwise, like if I treat it like a player character, then like one, it's adding complexity on top of complexity. So now you're running two, and like you're running them more than half of the time. So now you're running two characters
yeah.
that feels fundamentally imbalanced for the rest of the table. Like
Yep.
how come you get two characters, but
Yeah.
also your turn takes much longer. You're thinking about much because like we forget about them
Yes.
often
Yes.
because we've been handing him off situationally, so it's not always clear whose turn he goes on or
Right,
whatever.
because he had a swim speed. So in the last session, we handed him off to Mike, whose druid had a wild shape that had a swim speed. So those two were together, accomplishing the goal of the mission, getting the treasure box. So yeah, I actually was rooting for him to go down because then I don't have to deal with it, and I don't have to deal with that character anymore. So I do understand, like as a player, I'm like kind of like, okay, his time is he's served his purpose. But yeah, but narratively, I just thought it was interesting, like how you thought about that, because I thought, well, this guy's been around for a while. He should be able to level up at some point, and he's only got an armor class of 12. We should have bought him some armor or something? I don't know. Like we could have done that. So,
That I allow. That yeah, I will allow you to outfit an NPC.
but
I
now it's really getting complicated because now you're like, you know, now he is a player character, because now you're buying stuff for him and,
right.
you
Well,
know,
he's
yeah.
he's siphoned off a lot of golds. You guys have paid him
Yeah.
quite well
Yeah.
because he got a share like on that first mission, and that was 4 missions ago. And you guys have had some pretty good paydays. Um,
I mean, he came in handy in that first mission for sure.
and there's an interesting it's like again, it's a little more old school of having a retainer or like a wizard, right? Like you would have to carry a character like a backpack through the dungeon because they could do certain things, but like this guy's wearing a robe and he's got 3 hit points and he casts 1 spell a day, but he knows a lot of things, right? So like there's a lot of
Mm,
utility to it, but it is it's an asset you have to protect more
yeah.
than a co-equal character in the party because he's built like a frontline fighter, but he's a CR1 creature essentially. So like he's been outmatched for a while, but he's got a swim speed. He speaks Aquan. He knows a lot of. Dude lives underwater, right? So he has access to a lot of information that you don't, which has
Right.
come up several times. But yeah, now he's still walking around with whatever he's got, 25 hit points. Um, some of the AoE things that happened last night were enough to drop him in 1 hit.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a question. And there was a moment, I don't know I forget who said it, but it's like, well, does he have all the gold on him that we have been giving him this whole time? I was like,
Right.
nope, no way. No, he sent that home a long time ago.
Yeah.
Um,
I was
it's
like,
a-
look on the bright side. If he dies, we get our gold back.
you
And
said it.
you're
Okay.
like,
I was
ah,
like,
and
no.
you're like, no, no, he's
I'm
been
not
sent
gonna
it
let you
back home
game
to
it.
his mom.
Yeah. Also, like,
Yeah.
just narratively, this guy's not walking around with like 6,000 gold pieces, right?
No,
That's encumbrance and also just bad street smarts.
that's right. That's right. So one thing about the rogue, we were talking about I would turn him into a ranged fighter with advantage. That steady aim kind of thing. Uh, he does not get sneak attack. He does not get sneak attack if he casts spells.
Correct.
Only finesse and ranged weapons. So
Yeah.
that's important to know, right? So even in melee, it's only certain weapons. So he's not using a club and getting sneak attack with a club because that's not a finesse weapon. Um, yeah, and so if I went at one point I was going to cast Firebolt and it was like, no, you can't do that. Well, I mean you can do that, but you can't get sneak attack with it. So
And we did the deep dive just because, again, I'm open to like being wrong, right? So like, I know a lot of things. Some of those things are no longer true. I don't know which one is true still and which
what's been
one's not. So
modified? Yeah,
yeah, so so like okay, you're an arcane trickster. There's a chance they've changed that. So let's verify at the table the first time it comes up. The common wisdom is I make a calling, we look it up after the fact to keep the game moving. And I understand where that argument comes from, and if that suits you better, cool, do it. I'm not saying you're wrong, but in my personal experience, if it's a character ability, if it's something that's going to come up a lot, it's not some like weird edge case.
right.
Pause, look it up, get the answer verified, and now and now everyone at the table knows going forward what the deal is. We've all learned it better, right? It's cemented in our minds much more clearly,
Right.
and now we can roll with it. But yeah, the way I understand sneak attack narratively, it's like it's dex based, right? It's agility based. Like you are sneaky, but you're also good at like finding the sweet spot, right? It's
Right.
not like it's the
That's
kidney
right.
shot or something. You're
Right.
finding you're finding the chink in the armor to hit.
Right. That's right.
And that's not a strength thing, that's a finesse thing, right? The rapier gets in there.
It's the
It's
ability to
not the
put it
club or the
right.
axe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. It's not a bash. So yeah, that's the way it works. I think well, that's the thing. When we stop and we look up the rules, it benefits all of us because we are learning basically half a new system. And and it, and we're learning these rule changes. Like you said, it benefits everyone because we're the type of table where we chime in and we all look it up. So like if three of us have the book, we were looking stuff up. So like when the monk Craig's character was trying to do deflect attacks,
Mm.
and we were trying to determine whether that's in each combat encounter or if that's once a turn. And the difference being that someone attacked him on its turn, but it was in the same combat round, right?
It's
And
a yeah, it's a reaction. It's a
right.
reaction, so he can
So he'd
do it
already
once.
spent it once that
Yeah,
round, or he'd spent his reaction that round.
yeah.
So he couldn't do that when he got attacked directly. He couldn't deflect it a second time, not until it's top of the order again, right?
Which
So
I knew, but kind of lost track of actually because we had this deep conversation about, all right, if you deflect an attack, you drop it down to zero,
yeah,
right? And it was the gladiator shield bash, right? There's consequence. Now you're making a strength save to stay on your feet. If what if you have done a thing to reduce the damage to zero, are you still making the save now? And if there's an answer, let me know in the comments. Like, give me chapter and verse, man. Because I don't know, and I waffled for a while and figured I got to a point where it's like, okay, if you spend the key point to redirect it, that
mm,
absolutely answers the question for me. Where you have like a Kaido this thing, and like at one point he's a little gnome facing this big guy, so he slams the shield into this guy's chin. Cool. Absolutely, you're not making a save. In a different iteration, I gave him advantage on the check. This doesn't hurt, but it's still there's a force hitting you that would knock you prone, even if it doesn't hurt anymore. Like
yeah,
maybe you are, falling with it. Maybe you're rolling with the punch, but it's still going to put you on your back. But you're more likely to roll out of the way.
not
It's a
take
very
advantage.
interesting interaction, and I wonder if there's probably an Unearthed Arcana tweet somewhere, which I hate to reference those if it's not in the book. I don't care what it says on Twitter. But let me know. There's got to be. We can't be the first able to come up with that question. Although
I don't know, man. It's only a month old.
they did change. Well, that's what it is. They changed the monks. It used to be deflect missiles, and
Yeah,
now it's deflect attack.
right.
So it's possible with a lot more, right? If I do a bite attack that has a swallow and you reduce the bite to zero, do I still get an opportunity to swallow you? I don't.
Right.
I don't know. And like my first impulse is like narratively, like doesn't I can make it make sense in the story either way. Like it doesn't
Sure.
hurt, but you're
Sure.
still you're still going in that
You got
mouth.
swallowed. Yeah.
Um. So yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting one. I got to think more about.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's a situation where I just okay couldn't find the answer quickly. Right? There's an amount of time I will spend trying to verify the answer in the book, and if that seems like it's not there or it's taking more
Yeah.
than a certain amount of time, and that's just vibes. I can't tell you that I'm setting a stopwatch or something.
Right.
There's a point where I'll just make the call to keep it moving. So it's not hard and fast that we have to find the right answer to this character ability. If we can quickly and easily, cool. We're gonna do that at the table. If we can't, then like
Well,
okay,
that's why the declaration is there that the dungeon master makes the rules
yes.
so that the story can keep going, right? So you don't just fight for an hour about what's going on.
And
Unless
again,
that's what you like to do, and that's totally fine too. Like if
yeah,
you want to learn the absolute law of the land, rules as written, then that's totally fine. But you know, sometimes that's enough. Let's just get on with it.
right. Keep it moving. And we did a thing which I hate doing. I
Mm.
like really, really considered ending super early last night. We've ended early a couple times recently, which like we usually go like the store's closing, right? I'll find the opportunity to
Yeah,
create a
actually,
cliffhanger or something. Like I'll be
right.
watching the clock for the last 20 minutes.
We had to do that last night.
Um, you guys sealed the deal very quickly last time, and then we leveled up. So there was like a natural reason for like, going home. I mean, whatever, maybe an hour early.
Hmm.
But there was like 90 minutes before the session typically ended, and the table was set for just like a massive combat. You were having like the equivalent of three fights were happening together in waves. It was just like and I knew it was going to be epic and cinematic, and I was excited for it. But I was like, I don't know if we're going to do this in 90.
Right.
And it turns out that we didn't. So like I watched the clock for essentially like around every round. I was like, okay, do we have one more round in us? And we
Well,
we
that's
took pictures of the board and like very carefully recorded where we're at, and it does feel like a good moment to pick up. It's nice to start in the midst of a fight. But I don't like hitting pause in the middle of a combat.
well, that's a good DMing though, is keeping track of that, right? Because before we got kicked out of the store, we were able to be, courteous to to the store owner and finish in a timely fashion. So he can go home, sleep, and come back early in the morning. And you know, the I never have a problem with the go stopping early is fine for me because then I get to go home see my wife, and that's totally fine. But I'm cool with that. But when like say like tomorrow night at Adventure League, I'm kind of like rolling through like what I'm gonna do today, tomorrow, what I'm gonna do tomorrow today. So I'm thinking like one of the ways that if you say, okay, I'm going to have a 2.5 hour session, but you always want to have a little bit extra prepared in case they do solve that puzzle really fast, right? And then, because you don't want to cheat them, but also, you want to reward them. You don't want to like just unnecessarily throw something in there if they do circumvent a combat,
Right.
but you do want to make it interesting. Waves are a good way to do that, right? So you could have a 3 wave attack prepared, but if you're running short on time, you only get 2 waves. You can make the second wave stronger. Um, there are ways to like kind of do that behind the scene as a DM. And you know, I'm running like basically like a Halloween party, so and an escape room. So that's what I'm thinking. It's going to be like you show up at this Halloween party, but somehow you get like trapdoored or interdimensionally like sent into this escape room you have to get out of.
Mm.
And that's the adventure. And then I was thinking about a flashback in there with like if somebody wants to tell me an epic like combat that they had, we could run that. But I'm not sure how I'm going to put that in there. Um, so it could be 2 or 3 things. But what I'll do is I'll do the social combat or the social aspect first, which is you're at the party, right? At the tavern. And I could do this a couple different ways. So depending on what you order to drink, it could like give you temporary hit points, or it could like take away maybe something. So it
Mm.
depends on. I like throwing a random element of that in there without the players knowing it, So if they're like, yeah, I want to have an energy drink. Okay, great. Like you get 4 temporary hit points. But you're gonna like quaff 3 ales. Okay, you're gonna make a Constitution saving throw. Um, but but yeah, so I'll do that and then do the escape room, which will be like a couple puzzles in a row. And then when they get back to the room again, I think then I'll have like some of the masquerading creatures become monsters and they can fight. They can have a bar fight. And then I think so those 3 things should do 2.5 hours, I think. You
Because
know.
it does feel, I don't know exactly how you just phrased it, but it does feel like there's some sort of obligation is maybe too strong of a word, but this idea of like, I'm running a game tonight. I have come prepared with 3 hours with a session's worth of material. And part of that kind of means having at least some of next session, if we're talking about a campaign situation, not just one
Right.
shot, but there's more than enough because I don't know how quickly you're going to solve this. puzzle or whatever the thing. Like this could take an hour, this could take a minute. I need more than whatever the 3 hours of material to fill this space. And I only have 3 hours, right? Because the other side of the coin is like, you got work in the morning, it's a school night, whatever. The idea of like, oh, we didn't finish because I didn't manage this production well, also feels bad. So it's a balancing act. But once in a while, like that last week, like or 2 weeks ago, I had an impulse to pad essentially. I was like, oh, this is good. You've solved this very quickly. I should throw more on the table here to fill the time. But it didn't feel, it felt like removing your victory condition. Like you guys did
Yeah,
a lot of things right. You solved it. So okay, cool. Like, hey, revel in it. Like one, okay, you have I'm looking forward to go to see my wife. Like we have lives outside of D&D.
mhm.
Um, but also like, hey, cool. Like you here's a peek behind the curtain. Like you finished this way faster than I anticipated. Good job. And like you
Right.
get to kind of like bask in the glow of that for a minute.
That's your
Yeah.
reward.
Yeah.
Well, now that we're level 5, we'll have our bastions too. So that's a nice that's a thing that you can fall back on now. So if the session does go 1.5 minutes, or 1.5 hours, we can sit around and talk about how we're gonna, flesh out or feather our nests.
Yeah. Downtime
So
is good for that. Town stuff. I mean, we did level up and we did town stuff. So like shopping and going through and like we have a magic item vendor that you order stuff from. So like that
yeah.
eats up a lot of time and like energy and
Well, now we're gonna
thought.
have magic item crafting, so like we can do that kind of stuff. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff we can do at the table now that's not just strictly campaigning, which is nice to have those other options,
And one thing I used to do a
build
lot
together.
more of is like character-based questions, right? Like reflections on, we'll do
Mhm.
like recaps in the beginning of a session, but
Mhm.
like, okay, what happened is one set of focus. And then like, what did your character think about all of that? How did your character feel
Right.
when they were on the ground bleeding out? Like, what did your character think when that door slid open and the giant evil thing poured out of there? Like,
Well, it gives getting your players to fess up about that, or at least like think about that stuff and audibly, gives the DM a chance to do further plot hooks down the road for
oh, sure.
individual characters, and that's always nice too. So yeah, but that sounds like an entirely new video for another day. So thanks a lot, Ryan, and that was a great session, and I learned a lot last night, and I'm going to take a lot of that stuff into today and tomorrow when I
Awesome.
do
Happy
that
to hear it.
stuff. Yeah. So, all right, everyone. Thanks for being out there. Thanks for subscribing. We'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Recording stopped.